Welcome back, everybody. We are here for another episode with the Working Brother, another Working Brother Talks. We've got Drago Bosnić back with us for the second half of our interview, getting into some more serious topics. Dragoljub, or Drago, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great being here again.
All right, let's get into the heavy stuff. Considering the 1 year anniversary, or the 1 year of the special military operation. Speak to the Russian potential, because there's theories out there, people saying that the Russians have used only 15% or only 25% of their military potential, and some people say even as low as 8%, I've heard. And then there's people who from the West are nonstop telling us that Russia's going to run out of missiles and that Russian ships can't float and that Russian planes can't fly, and all these kind of very interesting approaches to generating public opinion. Speak a little bit to the Russian potential militarily, as compared maybe to China or the U.S. or anyone else.
Well, probably the craziest percentage I've seen in Western media was 97%. So that would mean the Russians have started using ICBMs long ago, and I haven't seen those, unfortunately. So, it's pretty interesting how they come up with those numbers. I really don't understand it. So.
Oh my God, that was good. That was good.
Yeah.
Keep going. Comedy.
Yeah. So I would say that they've used up maybe 10% of their potential. And the thing is, most of that was land power, in terms of intervention in Ukraine. Most of the military forces they've used were actually from the Russian ground forces. And I think they haven't shown most of the time the Western media are saying the Russians cannot project power, air power over Ukraine, which is ridiculous because the thing is the Russians, they need to keep most of their units where they are because they don't know if NATO is going to intervene. They don't know if NATO is going to get involved at any point. So they have to keep their units where they are, most of them, and they can only dedicate a portion of their air force and the rest of the military to the front in Ukraine. So it's ridiculous claiming that they can't do this or they can't do that. If that were true, NATO would have intervened by now. They would have bombed Russia or whatever. If Russia was that weak as they claim it is. On the other hand, especially in the beginning of the operation, they were trying to portray Russia as some kind of a superpower, which is can take Ukraine in 2 days. They were intentionally pushing this narrative so that they could say that Russia failed.
I'm confused now. Wait. So Russia is both super amazing and should have taken it in
exactly.
half a day, and then at the same time it's also going to fall apart and their military is poo-poo and can't do anything correctly.
Exactly. They need both narratives. They needed both narratives. That's why at the beginning of the invasion, they were portraying Russia is going to win in 2 days. But since that didn't happen and it couldn't happen because Ukraine is not a small country with 5 million people. It's they have 40 million people. It's the largest country in Europe and has the largest army in Europe, if we don't count Russia. So the point is Ukraine is a very big, piece of cake in the global or geopolitical sense. You can't really take a country that's that big and that powerful in 2 days. And Ukraine is way more powerful than any of the countries that the U.S. invaded in the last 50 years or even more, longer actually. So I would say the Russians have done pretty well, especially considering the forces they've used. And as I said, that's not more than 10% of their military potential. I don't think it's maybe 12 if we're being generous, but that's it. And of course, they had around 250 to 400,000 soldiers, depending on the source. That's the number of troops engaged in this, considering everything, the Wagner, the Russian military, the Donbas militias, and I think it's no more than 400,000 people who have taken part in the operation. On the other hand, Ukraine has been using at least 750,000 soldiers. Although that number goes up to 1 million when taking into account, territorial defense and all these mercenaries and volunteers from around the
volunteers
world.
and
Yeah. It goes up to 1 million. So considering that the Russians are the side which is attacking, and they are also outnumbered, I think they did pretty well. And as far as I know, like, of course, as I said, the numbers are not 100% true, or like it's not 100% possible to confirm this. But the recent numbers I've seen, especially from the Turkish media, and they are also citing like Mossad and Israeli intelligence. They're saying that approximately 150,000 or almost 160,000 Ukrainian soldiers died, while 18,000 Russian soldiers died. So, if those numbers are correct, and I have no reason to think that at least the number for the Russians is not true, because there are independent sources in Russia, or let's say pro-Western sources, which have managed to count like 15 to 20,000 Russians who have been killed so far. Like they're making lists. We could assume like they're probably pushing the numbers up, but let's assume that the number is true. So if 18,000 Russians were killed so far, that's a big number. But imagine 160,000 Ukrainians. That's almost like 9-to-1, like death ratio, which is a disastrous ratio for a military which was trained by NATO for the last almost a decade now. So I think that spells doom for NATO itself, because if the Russians are that successful in fighting, the AFU, the Kiev regime forces, I think it's a pretty bad indicator for how NATO would perform if they were fighting the Russians directly.
As a Serb and former Yugoslav like myself, I'm gonna keep referring to you that way because that's what we are. We're from a country that doesn't exist anymore. How would you evaluate like the info war sphere and how like you said, we can't be sure about the numbers. Like that's one thing that I learned long time ago, like when I was like 7, that you can't talk about numbers of casualties and numbers of losses of tanks and whatever, and yet there's people out there like that, like I don't know what they're called, but those websites that like confirm by pictures how many tanks Russia lost, and the fact that they lost 7,500 and 352 million tanks, and the Ukrainians have lost only 52 tanks, because there's no pictures of them from the Russian side. Speak to that a bit, taking into consideration maybe like the Kosovo war and the bombing, and how like at the end the Serbian military went out with more tanks than NATO thought we had in Kosovo at the beginning of the war. Speak to that a bit.
That's a perfect analogy, because maybe like 20 years ago it was like possible to use the images, videos, and pictures as a somewhat credible source. But now, like considering that, we have all these, software applications that can be used to, doctor images and videos. I mean, I think it's really hard to, use that as credible evidence, because I've seen a lot of videos myself where deep fake videos, which were used by the Kiev regime side to portray those as Russian battlefield losses, which of course was not true. Do you
remember the first couple of days of the special military operation? When
it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
There was an instance where an Israeli media news TV source used faked footage of like a TIE fighter from Star Wars crashed in Ukraine, and like people driving by in panic. Have you seen that footage?
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that. And I've also seen like a lot of videos from video games, like Armor Tree, for example, which was used
that as well.
to like portray, well, the Russian Air Force is somewhat defeated or something, and of course the Ghost of Kiev. I mean, it's one of the most ridiculous stories I've seen in recent years.
Since you bring up the Ghost of Kiev, I have to do a little sidebar. I wanted to mention in the last video, but I didn't want to interrupt when you were talking. I fly Microsoft Flight Sim, the game or simulator. And in it, just now, they've released the Antonov, Mirna, or whatever it's called, the Dream,
Yeah.
AN-225 that was destroyed by Ukrainian artillery when they were firing on the Russians who were not even near there. At the time. But yeah, anyway, and is blamed and is involved in a conspiracy that it was going to be used to attack the Donbass and blah, blah, blah. But it was only Shoigu calling all the ministers of defense, so it wasn't real. It never happened. In any case, those who know what I'm talking about. So in the game, you can get it, and it has a Ghost of Kiev skin on it.
Oh, really? So, do you shoot down all the planes just by looking at them?
No,
I guess
it's just the transport. It's just the transport. You can't shoot, and it's like a civilian sim. It's not military in the sense that all the planes, even the military ones, are not able to shoot. But in the but like Microsoft, what I'm getting at is Microsoft is pushing the narrative of the Ghost of Kiev, and if you go find the interviews, they worked with the Antonov company, and the Antonov company obviously is based from Ukraine currently. But it is not a Ukrainian company in the sense that it is a Soviet, creation, and the plane is a Soviet creation. So in the promotional videos of the game and the new airplane and some reviews even by I am a German pilot for the Lufthansa, but I show you stuff on Flight Sim and you can learn. Anyway, he calls it the Ukrainian plane. The Ukrainians designed a plane and so on. So going back to the propaganda of giving different names and labels to things and changing history. It's not happening only in the info news sphere. It's happening cross-culturally is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. That probably, maybe the best example of that is how they're trying to portray World War II. The World War II was basically the Ukrainians fighting the Nazis and getting into Berlin and liberating Europe, and that's all. I'm seeing this. You can see that in, for example, in regular stuff like Wikipedia. Basically they're trying to reduce the importance of Russia, as part of the World War II victory over the Nazis, and they're trying to push the narrative that the Ukrainians did most of the work, which is of course ludicrous. I mean, it's hard to, it's just hard to describe how stupid that is.
On a channel sorry, I have to interrupt. On a channel on Telegram, I ran into a revisionist who was trying to tell me that quote unquote, I'm quoting the story, her grandmother fought with the partisans in Croatia, so she's a good guy, but the Serbs were bad because they cooperated with the Nazis, and in Jasenovac, the biggest victims were the Croats. And I was just wait, what? Delete.
Yeah. It's an upside down world, It's an upside down world. The interesting thing is, the neo-Nazi regime in Kiev, they are openly Nazi, they're celebrating Bandera, but at the same time they're claiming they defeated Hitler. It's a mental mess, it's complete. It's very, very hard to compare that to anything else, in history. The level of hypocrisy and self-delusion that they are in, it's just insane. And of course, we have examples of that in former Yugoslavia, as you mentioned, the Jasenovac concentration, death camp, actually not a concentration camp. Also, there are various other examples in former Yugoslavia, but the one in Ukraine is probably the most glaring example of that, insanity that they are expressing to the rest of the world, and the world is swallowing that. It's incredible that people are actually accepting this propaganda as some form of truth or whatever. But
that's your personal opinion. That's your personal experience of reality, or is somebody paying you to say that?
I'm actually being paid, but anyway, I have to say it. So it's not my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that Ukrainians are just fighting off, the evil Mongol hordes of, the evil Genghis Putin Khan. So who's coming, to take,
Hitler.
the Euro-Atlantic values from Ukraine. So yeah.
Okay,
I'm against that.
One of the places that you write for is Global Research. By the way, highly recommended source. I've been using them or referring to them, let's put it that way, for a very, very long time in my life. And the reason that I bring it up, because it's on one of these other slides that we've got going. And this is Austrian Colonel Markus Reisner, I believe his name is. And here he is. On YouTube, I mean YouTube, with the Austrian, what is it called? Bundeswehr, which I guess is the army. But he's their military intelligence main guy, and let's have a quick listen to what he has to say.
By dominating the information intelligence, and what they do is by using a lot of different media outlets and of course social media. They try to contribute to a fog of war, which make it very difficult to understand the current situation, the conflict.
Very difficult to understand the conflict. Do you understand the conflict? Do you find it difficult to understand, or is it that people are telling you what to think and then that makes it easier for you to understand?
Yeah, I mean, if you watch CNN, it's pretty simple. So I would highly recommend CNN as a primary source of not just the Ukraine war, but like anything in life. You
Reality.
Know, like, yeah.
And if Christian Amanpour is on, then you know it's something serious. You know what I mean?
You know, it's 100% true. Like it's impossible for it to be a lie. Like I don't see a way how it could be a lie ever.
So this is another graphic that came out recently from this MIBURO, which is some kind of Microsoft Institute for like anti-Russian propaganda research. And I see that global research here has been labeled as zero hedge too, which is like what? I didn't know zero hedge was a Kremlin amplifier. What is a Kremlin amplifier in the geopolitical war sense of what we have going on?
Well, you know, the crazy part about all that is the Russians are really not doing any of that. You know, like the Russians have always been lousy in propaganda. You know, like it's like, I mean, it's not about supporting Russia or not supporting Russia. The thing is, they've never been good at propaganda. We've seen that in Soviet times. We're seeing it now. The thing is, people just want truth, right? So people are doing their own research, and there's a bunch of people doing that now. So now they have to fight against people, you know, like the Western propaganda, like the propaganda machine has to fight against all these people trying to figure out what's really going on in Ukraine, or anywhere else actually. So the point is, they're just gonna, you know, try to discredit all these people as Kremlin propagandists who are being paid, you know, and given millions and millions of dollars just, you know, to make all these clips on Telegram or YouTube or whatever. But the thing is,
YouTube is obviously not colluding with any YouTube creators, and the White House is definitely not behind that like they were with COVID and the TikTokers. That can't happen. That's the free liberal West, right?
Yep. I mean, if you look at Google, if you look at Facebook, especially Facebook, if you look at Instagram, if you look at YouTube, there are no traces of censorship of any kind. I haven't seen it. Anyone claiming there is, they're lying.
Yeah, we're still on, and this is just a comedy show. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So speaking a little more to the subject of our dear Austrian general, or I think he's a colonel, but they call him general here. Again, shout out to Putinger's cat for the translation.
Genau.
Let's have a listen and a read.
Die Waffenlieferungen an die Ukraine, ja, das ist wunderbar. Aber wie schaut das aus mit dem Personal? Wer besetzt alle diese Panzer? Ja? Kann die Ukraine da das Personal stellen, oder wird es doch so sein, dass NATO-Soldaten dann das praktisch bedienen müssen? Man spricht davon, dass Polen schon 20.000 Soldaten in der Ukraine stationiert hat.
Sie brauchen keine NATO-Soldaten in die Ukraine schicken. Ich ziehe meine Uniform aus, unterschreibe einen Vertrag und gehe in die Ukraine. Ich bin kein Angehöriger der österreichischen Streitkräfte mehr, sondern Vertragsbediensteter. Das ist die Lösung, die wir sehen.
Was man nicht ausschließt, dass doch welche.
Was man daraus schließen kann, ist, dass eine hohe Anzahl an ausländischen Söldnern sich in der Ukraine befinden, aber nicht von NATO-Soldaten.
So, what is your reaction to that?
Well, I think Bakhmut is a great example of what happens when you go there if you're a NATO soldier. So I would highly recommend all NATO soldiers to go there. It's a walk in the park. The Russians are very weak. They have no weapons. They have no ammunition. So I think it's going to be very easy to liberate, quote unquote, the Ukrainian territories lost. So, I mean, and very soon they will go into Crimea and take it. I would even say they will go to Moscow by the end of this year. So why just not go there, and check out how weak the Russians are.
Mm-hmm. So these NATO soldiers in different uniforms.
Yeah.
From a geopolitical perspective, not from a military perspective, how would you assess the desperation of NATO to have to basically do that in order to go fight? Is that a good indicator of how good this war is going for them?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is because the very idea that, the very fact that actually they can fight Russia directly pretty much, goes into the narrative that the war is not actually going well for them. So in all seriousness, as I mentioned the numbers previously, the numbers are very, very bad for them. So that could explain why they don't want to intervene directly. On the other hand, despite all the narrative about the victories of the Ukrainian military, the fact that they need so many weapons from the West, what does that tell you? What does that tell to the viewers? That means that a lot of the equipment the Ukrainian military had before the war was completely destroyed, right?
But no,
and they had
monitor told me that the Russians lost more tanks. The Russians lost more tanks. No.
Yeah, well, it's very possible. Who knows? Is that? That would explain why the Ukrainians are not asking or begging or begmanding for more tanks, right?
Begmanding, indeed. Yeah. I don't know what to say. Let's shift from the tanks, because everybody's been talking about the tanks. But one thing that hasn't been covered, I think, at all, or at least not in any kind of analytical way, is the use of those little drones, and not the store-bought Mavic artillery guiding drones and the seeing drones, let's put it that way, but more the suicide kamikaze chemical weapon little bomb anti-personnel kind of drones that are actually FPV, as in first-person view racing drones, that are were civilian up to this war. How do you see this new atmosphere, new scope of the warfare that we've seen used here like never before?
Well, I think it's going to expand dramatically in the coming years, and God knows what's going to happen in the coming decades, but we could speculate on that too. But I think in the next 10 years, that area, that segment of warfare, is going to expand dramatically from what it is today. It's already a major part of any operation on a tactical level. It's going to become even more important in the future. Like in this case, we can see how that A-50U, the Russian AWACS, was basically ambushed by this drone. But luckily, this drone is probably too small to carry any meaningful amount of explosive. But it's a pretty good indicator that, it's a pretty good indicator that you can actually get very close to major strategically important military hardware with very cheap drones that could be operated with just by two guys or one guy even. So, this is not a critique to the Russians. Something like that, like what we're seeing now, it could happen to anyone. It could happen to a NATO military or any other military in the world. So I think, defense against these little things, it's going to be very expensive, and it's going to require, even more what I call ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets by the militaries around the world. And, that means that defense is going to become more expensive. So, these small drones are probably one of the best ways of conducting offensive warfare, because they provide intelligence, they can provide first strike capability. They're very, very useful. So I think militaries are going to start implementing them more in the future.
And do you think the countering these threats is something that can be expected or realistic, or do you think it'll be more on the electronic side of countering, as I do, or do you think it'll be more, like physical counters?
I think it's going to be like limited mostly to electronic warfare, which means like that basically like electronic warfare is going to be the most effective way of neutralizing the threat. But like it has to be combined with the actual air defense systems. I'm talking about missiles because they're too small, and like it will be a disaster from the cost-effective point of view. But like they're going to need something like mostly like, let's say, World War II era like guns, that are going to be used to destroy these drones physically, because a way to counter electronic warfare is to use artificial intelligence. So you're going to have to, like, if you have a drone which is using artificial intelligence, you don't need a connection with it, because you're going to just upload a software which is going to like make the drone work without any connection with the operator. So like it's just, I think that's how it's going to evolve. You're going to have electronic warfare, and the response to that is going to be more AI, like advanced AI, not just regular AI that we see today. And in order to counter that, you're going to need a way to physically destroy the drones. And I'm sure like they're going to probably develop some kind of, I don't know, like mini missiles with, fragmentation warheads to destroy like, let's say, a swarm of these drones. That's probably going to be a way to counter these things on a tactical level. On a more strategic level, like in terms of longer range, they're just going to have to, improve the ISR, as I said, so that you can just destroy the platforms before they deploy these drones. That's probably going to be a way for the militaries to counter units which are going to be using these things.
And do you think this is like cross-border? Do you think this is like extreme long range, like this that we saw now in Belarus, or do you think it's divergent groups that are just outside the fence of the military base?
Yeah, I think they're very close, because I don't think like there's any drone which is that small, like a quadrocopter, which can go like hundreds of kilometers. Like it doesn't. I don't think it has.
There is.
There are.
Yeah. Within limits, within like specifications, with the right antennas and whatnot, it's possible.
Hundreds of kilometers, like with a range of.
Yeah, 100 kilometers, no problem there and back. But like,
wow.
it's a serious thing. And this is like 2-3 years ago in the drone hobby. It was like proven. Let's put it that way. So like that is possible, like 100 kilometers on a single battery. But regardless, like for example, the attacks that happened in Crimea that were probably also carried out by these smaller drones, but there's no footage of it. That to me is impossible to be controlled from mainland Ukraine. You know what I mean? So that is most probably something local. So yeah, what was it that you said? ISR? Is that what?
Yeah, ISR, like intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance, reconnaissance. Like that's it's a military term. It basically refers to like continuously observing the battlefield and following and tracking the enemy. That's one of the most important aspects of modern warfare. And drones are perfect for that. Like drones can provide that in real time. Without drones, like you would have to use other reconnaissance platforms which couldn't loiter, in the area for so long. So drones are perfect for that, and I think that's one of the most important aspects of drones. Not so much the fact that they can strike; they can be used as a weapon. But the thing is, you can use them as a way to see where the enemy is, and then you can use cheap methods like regular artillery. So like if you have a cannon or multiple rocket launcher to strike at the enemy, and there's a drone loitering around and observing the enemy, that's cheaper than just having to build 10,000 drones for a swarm. So in that regard, I think drones are they work as force multipliers for the current militaries. Like you don't have to like make so many of them. You just have to make them. You have to integrate them with the systems that already exist, and you can just use them in that way.
What about the recent escalation that we've seen from the Ukrainian side, obviously using chemical weapons and then also bragging about it on social media? Like, do you think when Nuremberg 2.0 comes around, that crimes like that will be prosecuted? Or have we reached a new normal where that's okay and, like, forget about it?
Well, if the political West continues to dominate the media sphere and the so-called international law sphere, I don't think it's going to be prosecuted ever. But if we actually create a viable international system, which is going to take everything into account, like what each side is doing and every side is doing in any conflict, then yeah, it should be prosecuted. And it will be prosecuted. So, but I'm not sure like who's going to make an institution like that, like where is it going to be, because the so-called international institutions we are seeing today, which are mostly like located in the political West, like in, I don't know, Switzerland or even the US or Belgium or Netherlands, how can we consider those institutions impartial or objective in any way? Like it's really hard especially for us Serbs. We have a lot of experience with how impartial those institutions are. So considering our own conflict here, so we cannot consider that those institutions will ever like take into account the war crimes committed by the Kiev regime against their own people in the East. So we need an entire new international system that is going to take into account everything. And to be honest, I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen.
I've got another question, which I think is very interesting, considering that you're a military analyst before anything else. Online, there's a lot of people who map the progress of, the war day to day. And they report on, gains here and losses there and whatnot. From a military perspective of like, the command structure and the information war and so on and so forth, operational security, can you speak to like, the discrepancy between like the probable situation on the ground anywhere at any time and what we see as, casual observers of serious open source intelligence people?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, seeing the modern battlefield in terms of like lines, there's like a red line which is separating the two sides. That's completely outdated. I mean, if it was ever the case in warfare, now it definitely isn't, because first of all, where is the battlefield? Like, where is the front line when you have the Russians launching long-range missiles from like Siberia, and those missiles are hitting targets in western parts of Ukraine? So like that does that mean like Siberia is also the front line? So in that regard, and also the drones that you mentioned, they also like basically erase the concept of like straightforward front line, because you can use a drone like to go like 100 miles or 100 kilometers and hit an enemy, let's say, warehouse full of ammo. So like the people who were guarding the warehouse, they would never say, "Oh, I was in the front line." No, they weren't. They weren't basically like directly in the front line. They never saw the enemy, but they got killed or they got injured. So the thing is, it's very hard to say, "Oh, the enemy is there," or this place or this village or this city is Russian or Ukrainian or whatever, simply because the front line is very fluid. Like it's not like a direct line as they're trying to portray it in the media. And we've seen that in the Kharkov region when the Ukrainians were conducting that counteroffensive. The media are saying in the West, they're saying that the Russians lost, but the thing is, the Russians were just pulling back, in order to not to lose troops in a mindless, meat grinder. So on the other hand, the Ukrainians are not doing that. What they're primarily doing is conducting a media war. So for them, it's more important to take territories, no matter how small or insignificant they are, and no matter how many people they lose doing that, in the process of doing that. So on the other hand, the Russians are actually fighting a war, an actual real war, and that's the reason why they think that territories are not as important as Ukrainians think they are.
There's another trope that's brought up very often, that, you know, the Russians don't have aerial dominance over the battlefield, that their AA is too weak, and that, you know, if it was NATO, there would be no Ukrainian jets flying, type of thing. What's your take on that, as far as the capabilities and what's been shown on the battlefield?
Well, first of all, like, to have a continuous air dominance over any territory, it's impossible. Like, even the Americans during the Iraq War, they didn't have like complete dominance. Like, actually, they've lost aircraft to the Iraqi Air Force in both wars, both in the first Gulf and the second Gulf War, or the Iraq War, as they call it. So, you know, in that regard, we can't say that the Russians are like, they don't have the dominance. The point is, like, what is the air dominance in this case? Well, the air dominance means that you can go in, you know, and bomb the target and go back. And the Russians have been able to do that overwhelmingly successfully. You know, like otherwise they would have lost hundreds of jets so far, but they haven't. So I think they do exert air dominance over Ukraine, but it's not complete. Like, the Ukrainians are still flying, but how are they doing that? Like, they're doing it by flying very low. And if you see most of the videos of the Ukrainian jets, like, they're flying like 100 meters above ground. Why is that? Well, that's the way for you to avoid long range, you know, radars, you know, detecting you and firing a 400-kilometer missile at you, you know, SAM system.
What was that record? So, what was that record that the Russians recently, 270 kilometers, something like that, from Russian territory? They shot it down over somewhere in Ukraine.
Yeah, that's the point. Like, most of the Russian fighter jets, especially interceptors, they can fire their missiles from Russia and just, you know, shoot down Ukrainian jets over Ukraine without ever entering the battlefield. You know, like, I mean, getting close to anywhere close to Ukrainian air defenses. Like, most of the losses that the Russians had were strike aircraft, like aircraft while they were trying to bomb, you know, targets on the ground. But they've never had, as far as I know, they've never had their fighter jets or any of their fighter jets shot down by the Ukrainians. Simply, I mean, the Ukrainians are outclassed in every way, like numerically, technologically, by the Russian Air Force, because the Russian Air Force actually upgraded their military, you know, jets over the last several decades, unlike the Ukrainians, who haven't done that. They simply lack the technological prowess to do that. So I think it's logical that the Ukrainians, if they go above, let's say, a kilometer of altitude, they're going to get shot down, because the Russians have jets like, for example, the MiG-31, which is extremely long range, extremely fast, extremely high flying. You can't, like, there's nothing even in NATO that can shoot that thing down, let alone in Ukraine.
So what is your expectation for the next, let's say, month or so, considering we've seen the huge buildup of Russian troops on the front line, with the recently mobilized troops filling in the rear, and Wagner and these forces making advances around Bakhmut, the Ukrainian side not giving up Bakhmut and sending tens of thousands of people, quote unquote people, not soldiers, to die. And Markus telling us that we're going to see more not NATO troops because he will take off the uniform. Yeah.
Well, in that regard, you know, I think this is going to continue being a slow grind. You know, it's going to be a slugfest for the rest of the conflict, I guess. But I think that's not necessarily a bad thing for the Russians, because they have they have the initiative. Like, they're still shaping up the battlefield. So you know, in that regard, I don't think much is going to change, because I don't think the Russians are going to try to go with fast, you know, like deployment of troops like at the beginning of the operation. You know, the BTGs or the battalion tactical groups, because, you know, I'm not going to say that that tactic was unsuccessful, but the thing is, like, it's very hard for the troops to keep up, you know, if you're going too fast. So I think going, you know, slower, but in a more careful manner, you know, where you're going to preserve your men, you're going to preserve your manpower. I think that's a winning strategy, no matter how slow it is. The point is the Americans are sending Ukrainians to die. Like they're basically, they're dying in like tens of thousands in this way. So even if 1,000 Russians die, you're going to have 10,000 Ukrainians on the other side dying at the same time to cover that loss. So I think the Russians are just going to continue doing that. And what's possible if they, of course, increase the resources used in this operation, they might make that even worse for the Ukrainians. Like the discrepancy might get even worse as the time goes, because the Ukrainians are depleting their forces, and they can't replace those losses with NATO equipment, because NATO doesn't have the industrial capacity to do that. I mean, they've said that themselves. Like various American officials, they said, including like NATO, top NATO officials like Stoltenberg himself, he said, we cannot produce the ammo that the Ukrainians are expending. So they cannot keep up with how much ammo the Ukrainians need. So as the resources for the Ukrainians reduce over time, then it's going to be harder for them, and the Russians are just going to keep their initiative or increase it.
And do you think that is one of the reasons that's let's say making the Ukrainians think about a suicidal mission into Transnistria for that ammo dump that the Soviets left for the Russians?
Yeah, it's very possible that they wanted to do that. However, I'm not sure like what's the state of all that ammo, because it's been like 3 decades, over 3 decades since like anybody was doing there any meaningful logistics or like replacement of that ammo. And considering that the Soviet Union had ammo which was 20 years old or 30 or even 40 years old at the time of its collapse, then that ammo there might be 70 years old, now, or like 50 to 70 years old. So like it's a question, considering the maintenance and everything, it's a question how functional that is, and also like what stops the Russians from just blowing it all up and not letting the Ukrainians get it.
Like send one Zircon and end the story. like let them open the door and then like just like hypersonic it.
Yeah, or just let the Ukrainians try to get it, and by the time when 200 Ukrainians get there to take the ammo out, just send one caliber or Zircon, and boom, that's it. Like it's like it makes no sense to try to get ammo like an ammo storage in the middle of a war, because you're sitting on a bunch of matches and all you have to do is just one spark and that's it.
Yeah, interesting perspective. I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, that's a good like final option for the problem in Transnistria. If the Ukrainians are suicidal enough, basically, to try that, which can't be ruled out because they have been known to be quite suicidal. First,
yeah,
of all,
they are desperate.
And second of all, they are cooperating with jihadis and ISIL. Yeah, what can be said? Anything else you'd like to touch upon before we sign off today?
Well, I would say that's pretty much it. As I said just the last time, I just hope that the people in Europe and the US and around the world are just going to take into account that the Western leaders are. I'm trying to stay polite and formal. They're not very. They're just a little bit delusional, let's say, and I think that this should be taken into account. And if the people are going to change the system, they have to start doing it as soon as possible and just hold their governments accountable, because we're all, like, the whole world is being pushed into a global confrontation which nobody's going to win, because this is going to be the last war if it were to ever happen. So let's hope it doesn't. And I think the way for the people to do that is to just get on the streets and just stop their governments from, and many of them are already doing that, in Germany, for example, and they were doing that in the 80s too.
And share videos like this. You gotta like and share videos like this. Support independent journalism and articles, and get your sources sorted out so that you can get more news from random places, and challenge every opinion. Think for yourself. That's the only way that we're going to solve this. And the streets, I don't know about the streets, man. I'm not a big believer in the streets.
Yeah, we've had bad, experience with that in Serbia, but I think like the people should get into streets as like the last resort in the case that their governments don't listen. Because I mean, who's insane to die in a thermonuclear Armageddon, right? So like, if that's the only thing left to do, I think that's what the people should do.
Well, yeah, okay. If it comes to thermonuclear Armageddon, yeah, get out in the streets and try and stop it. That's today's message. All right. Drago Bosnić, geopolitical and military analyst, who can be found in the links in the description. Thank you for stopping by again. It was excellent.
My pleasure.
We will definitely have you back on. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you for listening.